Hey guys, I'm Mike, and this is Tell Me What I'm Doing Wrong, an art critique and review video series. And today we're going to look at a comic book by Dan Butcher, Vanguard. You can find it at vanguardcomic.com. It's a near-future superhero book, and there are an amazing 16 issues available, absolutely free on his site, which is crazy. That's a crazy amount of work. I deeply congratulate you on all of that. A lot of people can't understand how much effort and time it takes to color and ink and write and letter and put this all together. It's incredible. But to do something like that, you need to take a lot of shortcuts. So a lot of what I'm going to focus on is how you can be better at taking shortcuts. What I'm not going to focus on, and these first few videos I've done, I've always started off by focusing on anatomy, and I'm not going to do that at all. And that doesn't mean that I don't believe you would benefit from a bunch of figure drawing. I think that you would. I think that everybody would, even myself, even Frank Frazetta, if he was alive, he might be the best at figure drawing, but he could always be faster. So I'm kind of excited to do this because I'm going to focus a lot on color and texture and lighting and things that I haven't gotten to talk about yet. And know that from the bottom of my heart, even though I'm going to savage you in some places, I want you to know that it's because I want you to put out the best comic that you can, because I'm a supporter of indie comics, because I buy and read tons of comic books, and I believe that you can do better work. I believe that this comic book can be massively improved with a fairly small amount of changes. And anything can always be better. And art is never finished, only abandoned, or whatever cheeky phrase you want to use. But from my heart to yours, this is hopefully for both our own goods. And I hope everyone gets a lot out of this. And we're going to start with the cover here. And the first thing that I do like is that this figure has been pushed back with line holds and desaturated to kind of push it into the background. And I like that. But everything else feels very, very flat to me. I was beginning to talk about cheating, and you have cheated this page in a number of ways all over the place, but you have not done it well. All of these textures that you see on these items, these are not things that were painted in. It's not like we're kind of photorealistic adjacent painting in bushes and things. This looks like it was taken from a game asset, and these textures were kind of put on these buildings and then maybe burned in here and stretched and warped. And you can do those things, but if you don't tie them together, and if you don't, at the very least, get the lines moving in with perspective, it looks like a patchwork horror. It just doesn't jive. It just seems kind of thoughtless. It's not amateurish. Like, you know how to do. You've demonstrated in tons of spots through all these issues that you can do all these things. And I feel like there are a bunch of moments where you just wanted to get it done. And I'm the kind of person, I don't want to put my name on something or show it to someone until it's up to my standard. So raise that bar internally because you're capable. Something that you also do a lot in terms of highlights are just slapping these circular airbrushed things all over the place, and you have to stop doing it. I don't know, it candies up your art in a way that does it a disservice. Every one of those that is there is not improving anything almost ever. And I get that you have a strong light source up here, and maybe those things are there, but you can still use the airbrush, but just a lazy little circle. You need to give some character and some variety to your art. Look at how same all the line widths are. They're all these mechanical, whether you did it, if this was a physical piece of art, if you would do it with a ruler and a micron. If it was this, it's some type of ruler tool inside. It doesn't matter how you do it. You can do these things either way. Digital, traditional, they're just tools for getting the right result. And your comic is clearly completely made digitally, And there's nothing, they're great digital comics, but they don't have to feel so mechanical. These organic things should feel organic. And I have an example here. Here is a part of a page from Daredevil that Alex Maleev did. And believe it or not, this building here and these here and this here, he didn't draw any of that. All of that is slapped right in from photos that he took inside New York City. He simply just binarized them, and then he went in with a black pen and maybe a little bit of color, and he drew in a figure, and he changed the storefront, and he added stairs or shadow or whatever. But he just blocked these giant perfect perspective things in for his scene using his own photography to save tons and tons and tons of time. To pencil and draw this thing out would have taken a really, really long time. And I bet in, maybe 30 minutes, he put these two things together and had them looking really good. And then he was like, oh, I want some windows over here and I don't like this and I'm going to add black. But he had a base to start with, and there's nothing wrong with cheating at all when you do it right, because this is a completely cohesive, amazing piece of art. Nothing looks out of place, even though this is clearly a photograph and this is just a little ink drawing. But there's a cohesiveness to it, and that's super, super, super important. So I'm not telling you not to cheat. I'm not. But what I am telling you to is spend a little bit more time with it. Get a little bit better at it. And when you do cheat, for God's sakes, be consistent with your shadows. I mean, if the sun is over here and you have this hard shadow over here, what's going on back here? Why, this whole thing should be pushed, these should be pushed back. These lines should have holds, just like her. This is the cover. Shadow, shadow, and be a little bit more subtle with your shadow. You don't have to block them in completely. Just like with the highlights here, you tend to use these white highlights that are, try and see how this subtlety is here. There's not a giant value drain. Now this appears to be a building right here. I don't necessarily understand the lighting at all. It seems in a lot of places you just sort of give an outline on the outside, and as opposed to because thinking about light is very difficult, and sometimes you want to make something look believable. It's not necessarily true. Okay? This doesn't have to be the perfect way the light would fall if this was a photograph and we set up and that's not it. What it has to be is believable. And there appears to be like a spotlight hitting the back of this gun, which you did not draw. And we'll get to that later. When that's fine. Don't get me wrong. You can use models and SketchUp and whatever. But if you do that, the guys do it on Deadpool constantly for those, what are those guns called? The bullet tooth Tony gun, the Desert Eagle .50, because it's way easier. Like, why would you draw that thing out? Just slap in the model of it and then draw it and make it your own. But you're not doing that. You're just using the model, and I think that's a mistake. What was I saying? Oh, but there's at least a subtleness to this lighting, even if you have shadows on both sides, and the curve of this leg should not be going like that. Human legs don't look like that. There would be a thing here, but I'm not going to get into the anatomy stuff. So I want you to cheat better, and when you do cheat, I want you to use the tools that you already have in your arsenal to render things appropriately. In an extra 20 minutes on this page, you could transform it from something that is very confusing looking, and you're telling a story here, a great story. We understand what's happening. This girl is she's trying to mess these guys up, and he's, trying to get back over to this girl, and I don't know anything about the comic, and I kind of get what's going on. That's amazing. But you have to refine it and have a little bit of subtlety, and try not to have such big disparities between here and here and here, and there are these big jumps, and you can have those big jumps, but when everything is so contrasty, your eye isn't drawn anywhere. And when everything is the same, here's another way to think about this page. And I try and only spend 20 minutes on these, but I know I'm going to go over. Your eye is drawn to saturation and it's drawn to detail, naturally. Well, all the detail are in these textures, and they're the least important thing. And all the saturation, like you have some of these, I can tell that this gray, sort of gray, is very desaturated. This is a superset. A lot of your darks are hyper saturated. This has been grayed out pretty much. So we're going to look, hopefully we're going to look at these figures first. But just due to the lighting and due to the scheme, there's just some improvements that could be made. This doesn't jive. Like, you can have all this and bash in these textures, but then make them your own. Make them, give your comic a look. Your comic's look is not textures I found online plus the stuff I draw in paint. That's not a look. It's not going to work. It's not cohesive. It seems like you don't care. And because of that, like, I've been to your site before looking for indie comics or on webcomics, and I guess this is the best criticism I can give you because it's before I ever looked at it as from an artist. But in my mind, I just went, oh, that guy's he's not doing something that he cares about. But once I went through your work and saw how much there actually was, you clearly do. But I think you're rushing. I guess that's the point. Let's move on. Back to the airbrushing. We gotta have some subtlety here. Every highlight is not white. You know, let's just say I'm going to start a painting. I'm going to start a watercolor or something of this nature. Like, the first thing I'm going to do is make that page less white, because there will be highlighted areas, but this is almost hard to, I mean, the page isn't even the sun, right? And it's too much. There's too much of this just glowing, and you can use a glow effect. There's certainly points where that's totally valid, but when you do it everywhere, it loses its effect, and it's also such a cheap, easy thing to do that, like, there's a little bit of camp in there. And if you want it to be campy, that would be one thing, but you're doing it all over the place, and you're mixing it in with some things that are really, really good, and it's just not working. It's not cohesive. One thing I will commend is that you use a lot of really simple, easy to read layouts on your pages. You make it very easy for someone to follow the story. And that's a hard thing for people to do, and I commend that. This is the second page, and it looks vastly, vastly different. Like, it almost appears as if it's another comic. I don't know how many fonts you have just in this issue alone, but there are several, and it really makes it hard for me to see the identity of what your comic is. In a vacuum, this seems to be your style, right? But every once in a while, there are these really jarring, disconnected, metallic, digital elements that really take me out of the story. And then you couple that with the odd mistake in proportionality, like his hand is too small there. If I could say one more thing about, if you could practice one thing when it comes to the errors that I see, it's that the head and 3/4 turn, just your standard, you know, the girl with the pearl earring or whatever portrait, you seem to really struggle with the placement of the features in that, and it will. I mean, sometimes you do it perfectly, and other times I don't know what's going on. And a lot of that is involving the color. We haven't really talked about color, and color, as a painter, color is the thing I may know most about. I do a fair share of drawing. Drawing and painting, there's not as big of a disconnect as many people think, but when you're only working with color, and a lot of guys can work digitally, black and white, and then add color later, because value is the most important thing. But on a lot of these pages, the colors are simply too saturated. Your eye is drawn to saturation, and you can't peg the saturation. I mean, I don't know if I did a comic if I would peg the saturation anywhere ever. Maybe once an issue in one little spot, because it's going to stand out, because you need it. It's the equivalent of painting in all caps. you just have all this hyper-saturated stuff everywhere. And I have a super psychedelic, colorful, you know, put that near the camera, like colorful style of comic art. I like brushy, almost impressionistic, like somewhere between modern illustration and influenced by impressionism. I like brushy and strokey art, and it's quite colorful. But I think that you just need to pull those back some. I mean, imagine how much more effective. Let's just do something here. Okay. So I've decreased the saturation on the entire page. And now I'm going to paint in areas where I bring it back to how you had it. I mean, look at how your eye is just easily drawn to the areas where you want it to be, just through very simple manipulation. And I've done it to a great extent. You should be more subtle. Maybe that's the great lesson in this thing, is just try and have a little bit more nuance. And I will draw on some stuff, because we're already close to 15. Well, we're at 16 minutes right now, so let me try and get to more points. Here's what I was talking about with the guns. I know that you didn't paint this. Maybe you added those white highlights. I don't know. But if you had painted this, do you see how subtle this is? If you had painted this, this would look like that. And because there's a disconnect in the way that objects are rendered overall and the way that you're using textures, it feels strange. And there are these very odd lighting choices. There's just these rim lights on everything, and there are all these really hard white spots, and it's as if there are, I mean, even if there are spotlights everywhere and hard lights everywhere, you would want to have a little bit more drama. There just seems that your characters are just constantly beaten by these super bright lights. And how are there you have these rendered in a really inconsistent way. Here, I seem to think that this is like a spandex suit, like Carrie-Anne Moss's character in The Matrix, and here it seems more like a jumpsuit. Like the reflectiveness of and you can't do this perfectly every time, but they should be consistent. I should know if this thing is made out of leather, and when I don't, I just get confused. It's inconsistent and sparsely textured, and it just seems like you're using grab and grab, right? All these little shapes. This is the most common form of comic. And I'll be honest, some of what I say may be biased because I hate grab and grab. I hate the idea of just making these little things and then getting an airbrush and putting them in, and that's how you do your little shapes. That's not how I do it, but I'm trying to set that aside and just be objective. And to me, it seems like you're just grabbing little spots for the sake of grabbing little spots and not thinking through it. It's not that you don't have the ability. I think you're just on autopilot. That's what I believe. So here is an example of where you cheated, but it's amazing. These big areas of flat color, these trees that you've like binarized out, or however you did this, there's a million ways that you just use layers and take a bunch of pictures of the Pacific Northwest or whatever it is, and then create this beautiful little soft digital thing. This makes total sense with your style of art, with all those big, traditionally kind of 90s style, color separated comic art. This works for me, man. It's like, oh, I can see that you cheated because I'm an artist, but it's so cohesive that if I wasn't, it would just make total sense. It's just great. And then you have these big, this is just so great. But then you bash in and digitize and then blur these birds that, does this world have birds that are enormous? This thing is well in front of these trees, and you can tell that by this swoop here. So these are at the very least even here. That would be an enormous, enormous bird. Also, you can tell that they're just blurred, binarized clip arts or whatever. You can't draw those. I know you can draw those. You've demonstrated you can draw people. You can't draw a bird in your own style. That's the right, you know, it's like cheat it. You got this great thing that you've zoomed in on. Beautiful. Cheat it. You zoomed and then you bent. But and it was so good. And then you took now it's less believable because you cut corners and you're supposed to cut corners. And I'm not bashing the art style itself. My favorite comic artist ever works within an animation style. The guy who I think is one of the best living artists. This guy right here, Matteo Scalera. He has a very, very, very similar style to yours, and I would look all through Black Science. Go buy Black Science. And there are a lot of similarities in the kind of style of art where you're seeing everything as these rudimentary geometric forms. And this guy he's amazing. He's absolutely amazing. And it's all traditional art and then digitally colored. He's not the colorist probably for the sake of time, but that's how long it takes. It takes him a month just to draw it and add some basic rendering via gouache, because that's, I believe, how it's done. But, so I truly believe that your comic could be every bit as good as the quality of Black Science, but you got to pay attention to a lot of details. And in this one, in Black Science, there's no shortcuts whatsoever. Everything is hand-drawn. And a lot of the things are very basically shaped, but with a super, super good attention for illusion of detail rather than detail itself. I think that sometimes we take shortcuts like this gun because we're afraid that whatever we would draw, like it would be too complicated to draw this thing out. Well, does it need to be this complicated to show what it is? I doubt it. We don't need to just take some model. And if you do take some model, make it your own. Spend some time chipping away at it and making it fit your world rather than just be something I've seen in every action movie ever. Here's another example of the sort of kind of photorealistic-ish effects that don't jive with the animation-ish style. We need to tie things together better and make the world unified. Because look at it's a simple, super readable layout that I love, that works best in comic books. If you have a simple art style, you should probably have a panel style that matches that for your audience. You know, something like Sandman that is a very dreamlike, sort of ethereal thing, has a, you know, it can be more experimental, but I'm glad that you're really sticking with the basics there. I wanted to paint a little bit on, well, not even paint. Here's a good example of the inconsistency in lighting. We're just sort of using these outlines everywhere, and you don't need so much, you don't need to spend so much time trying to give the illusion of detail. I'm just going to use a smudge tool and just think about this front plane should be totally in shadow. You have not only the sun, but these engines all beating down upon him. And let's just try and ease up and you know, I'm even going to take out some of the lines, but sometimes there's quote-unquote details that don't need to be there. Like what we need to believe is that this guy is actually falling towards us. And for that to happen, he needs to, I mean, why? Why are those there? Why would those highlights be there? Is he falling at a mirror? I mean, we need to create the illusion of depth. And the only way that you're going to get depth like this is to just do the thing that's hardest to do and just block it out. Like if this was a Mike Mignola or something. This is going to be a totally crude representation of that. But we might see something like this. Right? And although this is we definitely would cut into that in some places, but that is what's going to happen. Typically speaking. And I know that that's a very crude representation, but my point is that don't just grab and grad all over the place and circle things and create all these little bumps and details because you think that it looks cool. Because looking cool is sort of important, but what's more important is that your story is cohesive and makes sense. And that's why some of the most basic cartooning things ever can be so believable, even with just two tones. And I think that oftentimes when we try and introduce too many elements, what ends up happening is that they just jumble together, and we've tried to do too much. And pull back and think whether or not it makes sense. How would these lights really work? And this is a very sort of rudimentary animation style thing, but that doesn't mean that it can't be full of nuance, and it doesn't require a ton of thought and effort to do right. Because in some areas you have no texture at all, and other areas you are just rife with texture, and there's a balance there. And again, with the sky, I'm willing to bet, like, is this pegged saturation? It's super close. Like this, you're drawing your eye to this background when the background should be in the background. Don't pull it forward with all this color all the time. It's very, very distracting, and it makes your work less readable. I can't tell what's going on. My eye is confused. And I love the character designs that you have going on here. I think she's this really interesting banshee archer type character. From the previous panel in here, I do wonder about where her bow is pointing, but that's a small detail. But in any event, I hope that I've been encouraging and offer good advice, even though I know I'm saying things that may be difficult to hear. But I really think that you can make this thing super amazing and super appealing to even more people. If you... what were the big bullet points? Number one, if you're going to cheat, learn how to do it well. I don't know of any videos or someone doing that kind of content, but I am going to be making a full sort of preamble to a comic. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm going to try and aim for a AAA quality hand-painted thing. And there's going to be a lot of digital design elements and whatnot. And I'm going to be streaming all of that on YouTube. And you can use that as an opportunity to bash me. And you can also use it as an opportunity to learn how to cheat well, because I'm going to use all these interesting little 3D environment tricks to create kind of backgrounds that I can paint on very, very quickly and efficiently. That will save me a lot of time penciling and worrying about perspective and things like that. So hopefully I can offer some real direct insight on how to cheat well. But you can't cheat until you can do it without cheating. Otherwise, that's when it looks bad. Right? You can't, if you don't know how to paint it to begin with, then you don't know how to cheat it in. And there are artists that cheat on a constant basis, and you never know it because they could do it. They're just trying to save time. They found a more efficient way. Watch some concept artists, like the FZD design school guy. That guy's he's got full of amazing advice. And watch him photo bash some stuff in and then paint just to save himself a time to get colors and value and whatnot. And I know that you're not necessarily painting, but I think a lot of that stuff will apply to the tedium that is creating comic art. And I know that most people are never going to appreciate how much work you put into this thing, and I want to see you reap the rewards. So I wish you the best of luck in the future. I hope that this has been helpful. And by all means, if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them privately, and watch when I make Queendom online. If you or anyone else wants to learn how to cheat and cheat well, I'll be doing some videos on that. Okay? Take care, everybody.